Can a single decision ruin the credibility of an entire career? To what extent are the rules applied fairly in Formula One? Today we are going to unravel the truth hidden behind one of the most controversial sanctions in recent years, and how this decision could mark a before and after in the 2025 season. The 2025 Mexican Grand Prix not only left a sporting mark, but also unleashed one of the most resonant controversies of the season around a figure who rarely goes unnoticed, Lewis Hamilton. What should have been a celebration for Ferrari and a symbolic rebirth for the British driver ended up becoming a media and technical storm after a decision that has polarized both fans and experts, a 10-second penalty that, beyond the lost time, called into question the very foundations of impartiality in Formula One. Hamilton began the weekend with clear signs of competitiveness. A strong classification gave him third place on the grid, his best result of the season so far, while his teammate Charles Leclerc was positioned in second position. Optimism took over the Ferrari box. It was the ideal combination for the British driver to finally break that psychological barrier of the podium with the Scuderia, an objective that had eluded him due to strategic errors, lack of rhythm, and technical problems in the previous races. However, everything changed in just one lap of the race. Lap 6 was the scene of a direct confrontation between two old rivals, Hamilton and Max Verstappen. The maneuver began with the Dutchman attacking aggressively on the inside of Turn 1. The result was contact with Hamilton's red car, which was forced to leave the track. This incident was just the beginning of a chain of decisions and omissions that led to obvious injustice. Verstappen cut Turn 2 and continued on the grass in Turn 3 without returning position. The most striking thing is that this movement was completely ignored by the commissioners. There was no sanction. There was no warning. It was simply classified as a racing incident, even though the cameras showed clear contact between the cars and an obvious change in the racing order. The tension increased when, in his attempt to regain the lost place, Hamilton went around the outside on the approach to Turn 4. With the asphalt still cold and the altitude making grip difficult, he blocked his brakes, went slightly off the track, and returned to the track through the grass area, emerging just in front of the Red Bull. The maneuver was risky, yes, but it was also a product of extreme track conditions. What came next was the breaking point, a 10-second penalty for gaining a lasting advantage by returning in front of Verstappen. In sporting terms, that sanction annihilated his career. He lost positions, valuable time, and the chance to fight for a legitimate podium. But what really turned Hamilton on was the disparity in criteria. Why was he penalized and Verstappen not? Why did the same incident have two different interpretations depending on the protagonist? His reaction on the radio was visceral, unfiltered, full of frustration. That's bullshit, man. The grip there is minimal. There's practically no traction. And that response was not simply another complaint from a driver under pressure, but a cry of despair at a regulation that seems to be interpreted according to the taste of the moment. This scene summarizes a structural problem of modern Formula One. The selective application of the regulations, the lack of coherence between similar sanctions, and the growing feeling of impunity for certain drivers, particularly Verstappen, are not new issues, but in Mexico, they found a new spark. Hamilton's penalty was not just a sporting punishment. It was an implicit statement of who has room to maneuver and who doesn't, who is observed with a magnifying glass and who with benevolence, who is held accountable for even a millisecond and who gets the benefit of the doubt time and time again. Hamilton's outburst, both on and off the track, is actually the symptom of a deeper illness, a lack of regulatory consistency. In a sport where every second is analyzed, where the margins between glory and failure are invisible, these types of decisions contaminate not only the result of a race, but the integrity of the championship. And when one of the most successful drivers in history with decades of experience, records, and moral authority loses faith in the stewards, the problem stops being anecdotal and becomes structural. The Ferrari team's reaction was immediate. As soon as the race was over, while the final times were still being analyzed and the positions were being calculated after the penalties, Fred Vasseur, team director, appeared before the media with a gesture that oscillated between contention and helplessness. His body language said it all. What had happened to Lewis Hamilton at the Mexican Grand Prix was not only unfair, but reflected a deeply inconsistent decision-making system that directly harmed one of his drivers at a critical moment in the season. Vasseur was clear, precise, but without hiding his disappointment. He called the 10-second penalty very, very harsh, a carefully measured choice of words, but clearly critical. According to the Frenchman, the technical infraction committed by Hamilton leaving the track and not returning the position could merit a sanction, yes, but never of that magnitude. The most forceful phrase of his speech summed up the general feeling in Maranello. I don't remember when someone received 10 seconds for an infraction like that. In recent paddock memory, penalties of this nature have been reserved for clearly unsportsmanlike maneuvers or serious repeat offenses. Applying it in such an ambiguous context, conditioned by track circumstances, showed Ferrari a lack of proportional judgment. The team's stance was supported by the data. Telemetry showed that Hamilton's return to the track was not intentionally advantageous. The uneven grass with little grip forced the Briton to rejoin with great difficulty, calling into question the argument that he had a clear advantage. Furthermore, when he finally returned to the track, the position was contestable and did not even pose a direct threat to Verstappen's race. Even so, the stewards acted with a harshness that surprised everyone, particularly because the same criteria were not applied to Verstappen in his multiple movements outside the regulations during the same exchange. Ferrari also highlighted a key detail in its defense, the interpretation of the race director's notes. According to Vasseur, the team may have made a mistake by not strictly following the specific recommendations regarding how to return to position after leaving the track. But even then, logic dictates that the penalty should have been less severe, possibly a 5-second penalty or a direct instruction to give up position, as has been seen on multiple occasions. What they received was extreme punishment, disproportionate to the actual effect the maneuver had on the race. The internal message at Ferrari was one of unity. During the radio communication, both Hamilton's track engineer and other members of the wall made clear their disagreement with the decision. In the post-race analysis, the team agreed that this penalty cost not only third position, but an enormous amount of points in the Constructors' Championship. The frustration was amplified when considering that, if he had reached the podium, Hamilton would have taken an important step in his integration process with the team, boosting morale and confidence at a time when the Scuderia needs concrete results to stay in the fight against McLaren and Mercedes. During the incident between Hamilton and Verstappen, there were 3 clear moments in which a penalty could have been applied to either driver. In Turn 1, Verstappen attacked with an aggressive move on the inside, generating contact with the Ferrari and forcing Hamilton off the track. Then, in Turn 3, the Dutchman cut through the grass without returning to position. Finally, at Turn 4, Hamilton blocked and rejoined in front of the Red Bull, resulting in the penalty. The FIA investigated but decided that the first incident was a racing incident and that the second did not warrant correction. Only the third was sanctioned, and with the maximum severity possible, without a black flag. The problem is not only the penalty itself, but the way in which that decision was reached, completely ignoring the global context of the maneuver. In technical terms, this breaks with a logic of precedence that until now had been relatively stable. On multiple previous occasions, and with different drivers involved, the FIA has opted for the route of warning or position return as an initial response. In the case of Mexico, Hamilton was not even offered that option. There was no room for correction, no prior instruction. It went directly to a race penalty. This selective rigidity in the application of the regulation is what fuels suspicions. This is not direct favoritism, but rather an accumulated perception that some drivers, because of their status, history, or style, are treated differently. What happened at the Mexican Grand Prix cannot be analyzed solely as an isolated incident, nor limited to the immediate consequences of a race penalty. The penalty to Lewis Hamilton and the Ferrari team's response have activated a chain of repercussions that go far beyond a specific result. We are talking about implications that touch the psychological, the technical, the sporting, and the institutional. Each of these fronts will affect the development of the 2025 championship and will likely reconfigure some of its internal dynamics. On a strictly sporting level, Ferrari lost a golden opportunity to establish itself as a serious contender for the Constructors' Championship. After a start to the season with ups and downs, the Maranello team arrived in Mexico with clear signs of recovery. Leclerc and Hamilton were both well-positioned in qualifying. The race pace was competitive, and the SF25's technical package seemed to have finally adapted to the demands of the circuit. A double podium was not a dream, it was a real possibility. But after the penalty and Hamilton's fall to the middle group, that projection fell apart. In a championship as tight as the current one, where McLaren leads by slim margins and Mercedes is on the prowl, losing a dozen points in a single race can be decisive at the end of the season. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.